The rain hammered against the cracked window of my studio apartment with the relentless fury of Manhattan in October, each drop seeming to mock my desperate situation. I stared at the eviction notice in my trembling hands, the red letters blurring through my tears as the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. 72 hours. That's all I had left before everything I'd fought to build would be gone. 3 jobs. I worked 3 jobs, and it still wasn't enough. My fingers traced over the mounting bills scattered across my secondhand coffee table, medical expenses from my pregnancy checkups, groceries bought with careful calculation, utilities that I'd been rationing like precious resources. The math was cruel and unforgiving. I made $1,200 a month between my shifts at Mel's Diner, cleaning offices at night, and weekend catering gigs. My rent alone was $800. I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling the slight curve that had become impossible to hide beneath loose sweaters. 5 months. 5 months of carrying this secret, this beautiful burden that terrified me more than anything I'd ever faced. How could I bring a child into this chaos? How could I provide for someone so innocent when I couldn't even provide for myself? The apartment felt smaller than usual, the peeling wallpaper and water stains on the ceiling seeming to close in around me. This tiny space had been my sanctuary for the past year and a half, the first place that had ever truly belonged to just me. Now it was being ripped away, another casualty of a life that seemed determined to knock me down every time I managed to stand. My phone buzzed on the table, and I grabbed it desperately, hoping for a miracle. Maybe it was Mr. Henderson from the diner offering me extra shifts. Maybe it was someone, anyone, with a solution to this nightmare. Instead, it was a text from my landlord. "Penelope, I'm sorry, but the building's been sold. New owners want everyone out by Friday. No exceptions." Friday, 2 days from now. The eviction notice had been optimistic. I dropped the phone and buried my face in my hands, letting the tears come freely for the first time in weeks. I'd been so careful, so strong, rationing even my emotions because crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. But now, alone in my dying apartment, with the rain drumming against the windows like funeral bells, I let myself break. The baby moved then, a gentle flutter that reminded me I wasn't really alone. Never truly alone anymore. I whispered to my stomach, "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry I can't give you better than this." A sharp knock at my door made me freeze. Landlords didn't knock at 9 p.m. unless it was an emergency, and I'd already received the worst news possible. I wiped my face hastily and moved to the door, peering through the peephole. My heart stopped. Preston Castellano stood in my hallway, his expensive black coat glistening with rainwater, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the storm. He looked exactly as I remembered, dangerous, beautiful, and utterly out of place in my shabby building. Water dripped from the ends of his hair onto his perfectly tailored suit, but he seemed oblivious to the discomfort. I stumbled backward from the door, my hand flying to my mouth. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I was at my most vulnerable. I'd spent 18 months hiding from him, carefully avoiding anywhere he might find me. And here he was, standing outside my door like some dark guardian angel summoned by my desperation. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Penelope." His voice carried through the thin door, rich and commanding, even muffled by wood and distance. "I know you're in there. Open the door." I pressed my back against the wall, my breathing shallow and rapid. How had he found me? How did he even know where I lived? I'd been so careful, paying rent in cash, avoiding social media, working jobs where no one would think to look for someone with my background. "Go away, Preston," I called out, proud that my voice didn't shake as much as my hands. "Whatever you want, I'm not interested." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of rain and my thundering heartbeat. Then his voice came again, softer this time, almost gentle. I know about the baby, Penelope. The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees nearly buckled, and I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about the one secret I'd guarded more carefully than my own life. I don't know what you're talking about, I lied, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. 5 months, he said quietly. You're 5 months pregnant, working 3 jobs, and you just got evicted. Your medical records show you've been using a false name at the clinic, but DNA doesn't lie, Penelope. The child is mine. My world tilted on its axis. He'd accessed my medical records. He'd been watching me, tracking me, probably for months. The privacy I thought I'd built was nothing but an illusion, and he'd shattered it with a few simple words. That's impossible, I whispered, though we both knew it wasn't. There had been one night, one moment of weakness 18 months ago when I'd thought I loved him, before I'd learned the truth about his world, about what loving Preston Castellano really meant. Open the door, he repeated, his voice carrying that familiar authority that had once made me feel protected instead of trapped. We need to talk. I knew I should refuse. I knew I should call the police, though what good would that do against a man with Preston's connections? Instead, I found myself reaching for the deadbolt with trembling fingers. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe desperation, or maybe some small part of me had been waiting for this moment despite everything. The door swung open, and there he was, filling my doorway like he'd stepped out of my darkest dreams and deepest longings. He was bigger than I remembered, more imposing, his presence overwhelming in my tiny space. His gray eyes took in everything, my tear-stained face, my protective posture, the eviction notice visible on the table behind me. You look tired, he said softly, and there was something almost tender in his voice that made my chest ache. What do you want, Preston? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. He stepped into my apartment without invitation, his expensive shoes silent on my cheap carpet. His gaze moved to the scattered bills, the packed boxes I'd optimistically started before reality crushed my hopes. The ultrasound photo I'd forgotten was sitting on my counter. I want to take care of you, he said simply. Both of you. The words should have filled me with relief. Here was the solution to all my problems, offered by the one man who had the power and resources to actually provide it. But I knew better than to trust gifts from Preston Castellano. There was always a price, always strings attached that would bind me tighter than any legal contract. In exchange for what? I asked, wrapping my arms around myself protectively. His smile was slight, almost sad. You always were too smart for your own good. He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, expensive and intoxicating, mixed with the clean scent of rain. I have a proposition for you, Penelope, a way for both of us to get what we need. I don't need anything from you, I lied. He gestured to the eviction notice, to the bills, to my obvious distress. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you need everything I'm offering. The baby moved again, stronger this time, as if responding to the sound of its father's voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. The child I'd tried so hard to hide was now the very thing that had led Preston back to me. What kind of proposition? I heard myself ask, hating how desperate I sounded. Preston's eyes softened slightly, but there was steel underneath that softness. My sister Piper is dying, Penelope. She has a rare blood disorder, and she needs constant care. Someone gentle, someone patient, someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the blow that would change everything. Care for her, and I'll give you everything you need. A place to live, medical care for you and the baby, financial security. In return, you give me what I've wanted since the day you disappeared. Which is... His gaze held mine, intense and unrelenting. You, my child, my family, under my protection, where you belong. The offer hung in the air between us like a gilded cage, beautiful and tempting, and utterly terrifying. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside my tiny apartment, a different kind of storm was brewing. One that would determine not just my future, but the future of the innocent life I carried. I looked at Preston Castellano, at the man who could solve all my problems with a single word, and realized that sometimes salvation came in the form of the very thing you'd spent your life running from. The question wasn't whether I would accept his proposition. The question was whether I would survive it. I stared at Preston in the dim light of my apartment, rainwater still dripping from his coat onto my worn carpet. The silence stretched between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross, while outside the storm seemed to mirror the chaos in my chest. His proposition hung in the air, salvation wrapped in silk and danger. "Your sister," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the rain. "How long does she have?" Something flickered across Preston's face, a crack in his usual composed facade. For just a moment, I saw the man beneath the power and control, someone who was as desperate as I was, just in a different way. The doctors said 6 months. That was 4 months ago. His jaw tightened. "She's 16, Penelope. Just a kid who deserves better than the parade of clinical nurses who treat her like a medical condition instead of a person." My hand moved instinctively to my stomach. 16. The same age I'd been when my own world had collapsed, when I'd learned that depending on others meant inevitable heartbreak. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about the life growing inside me, about choices that would echo through generations. "Why me?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Preston stepped closer, and I caught that familiar scent that still haunted my dreams. Expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him that made my traitorous body remember things I'd tried so hard to forget. "Because you understand what it means to be alone," he said softly. "You know what it's like to fight for every breath, every moment of happiness. Piper needs someone who won't pity her, who won't treat her like she's already gone." His words hit deeper than I expected. He'd been watching me long enough to know my story, to understand the scars that had shaped me. The knowledge should have terrified me, but instead, it made me feel seen in a way that was both comforting and dangerous. "And if I say no?" I forced myself to ask. Preston's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his gray eyes. "Then I walk away, and you figure out how to survive the next 72 hours on your own. But we both know that's not really an option anymore, is it?" He was right, and we both knew it. I was 5 months pregnant, about to be homeless, with barely enough money for groceries, let alone prenatal care. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford when I was carrying his child. "I need to think about it," I said, though my mind was already calculating the impossible mathematics of refusal. "Of course." Preston reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. Not his business card, something else. "That's Dr. Sarah Chen. She's the best obstetrician in Manhattan, and she's expecting your call tomorrow morning. Consider it a gesture of good faith." I took the card with trembling fingers, staring at the elegant script. "Preston, I can't afford. You're carrying my child, Penelope. Money is no longer a concern for you." His voice carried an edge of possession that sent shivers down my spine. "Whether you accept my proposition or not, I won't let anything happen to either of you." The words should have been comforting, but they felt like chains made of gold, beautiful, valuable, and completely inescapable. Preston Castellano didn't make idle promises, and he didn't accept refusal easily. I was beginning to understand that my choice might be an illusion, carefully crafted to make me feel like I had some control over my fate. Thunder crashed overhead, and the lights in my apartment flickered ominously. Preston glanced around the space with barely concealed distaste, at the water stains on the ceiling, the thin walls that did nothing to muffle my neighbors' arguments, the general air of desperation that clung to everything I owned. "This isn't safe," he said quietly. "Not for you, and certainly not for a baby." I wanted to argue, to defend the little sanctuary I'd built, but another crack of thunder sent vibrations through the building that made the windows rattle in their frames. He was right. This place was falling apart around me, and I'd been too proud and too scared to admit it. What exactly would this arrangement entail? I heard myself ask, and I knew I'd already started down a path I couldn't retreat from. Preston's posture relaxed slightly, as if he'd sensed my capitulation before I'd fully admitted it to myself. "You move into my estate. There's a guest wing that would give you complete privacy while keeping you close enough to help with Piper when she needs it. You'd have your own suite, your own space, full access to the grounds." He paused, studying my expression carefully before continuing. "I'm not asking you to be my prisoner, Penelope. I'm asking you to be part of my family." Family. The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd been alone for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have people who cared whether I came home at night. But Preston's version of family came with complications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "And after your sister." I couldn't finish the sentence. "After Piper, we'll figure out what comes next, but I won't abandon you or our child, regardless of what happens between us." His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You have my word on that." His word. In Preston's world, that carried more weight than any legal contract. Men like him didn't survive by breaking promises, especially not ones made in moments like this. The baby moved again, a gentle flutter that reminded me this decision wasn't just about me anymore. I had someone else to consider, someone who deserved stability and security, and all the things I'd never been able to provide for myself. "I need some guarantees," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Preston's eyebrows rose slightly. "Such as?" "Complete medical care for me and the baby, a legal document ensuring I can leave whenever I choose, and—" I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. "I want to meet Piper before I decide anything. If we're not compatible, if I can't help her the way she needs, then this won't work." For a moment, Preston said nothing, and I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since he'd appeared at my door. "Fair enough," he said. "There's just one more thing you should know." My stomach clenched. There was always one more thing with Preston. "What?" "The people who've been watching you, the ones who helped me find you, they're not the only ones looking." His expression turned serious, almost protective. "Your disappearance 18 months ago left some loose ends. People who think you might know more about my business than you actually do." Fear crawled up my spine like ice water. "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't ask questions before they act." Preston stepped closer, and I could see the concern in his eyes despite his controlled tone. "You're not safe here, Penelope. You haven't been safe for months. I've been having you watched for your own protection, not just to keep tabs on you." The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. All this time, I'd thought I was hidden, safe in my carefully constructed anonymity. Instead, I'd been living in a fishbowl, watched by Preston's people while potentially being hunted by his enemies. "So this isn't really a choice at all, is it?" I asked bitterly. Preston's jaw tightened. "There's always a choice, Penelope. But some choices are easier to live with than others." Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, wind howling around the building like a living thing. Inside my apartment, I felt the walls of my old life crumbling around me. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, was disappearing like sand through my fingers. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe some walls needed to crumble before something stronger could be built in their place. "When?" I asked quietly. Preston's relief was subtle, but unmistakable. "Tonight. I have a car waiting downstairs." "Tonight?" My voice pitched higher. "Preston, I can't just—" "You can. And you will." His tone brooked no argument. "Every hour you stay here is another hour you're in danger. Pack what you need for a few days. Everything else can be replaced." I looked around my tiny apartment, at the life I'd painstakingly assembled from scraps and determination. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Leaving it felt like abandoning the last piece of the person I'd been before Preston Castellano had first walked into my world. But that person had been naive, vulnerable, and ultimately disposable. The woman I was becoming, pregnant, hunted, desperate, needed the protection that only Preston could provide. 15 minutes, I said finally. "Give me 15 minutes to pack." Preston nodded, then did something that surprised me. He reached out and gently touched my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "You're making the right choice, Penelope. For both of you." As I moved through my apartment, throwing essentials into a suitcase, I caught glimpses of Preston in my peripheral vision. He stood by the window, watching the street below with the vigilant attention of a man who expected trouble. Even here, even in this moment that should have been about comfort and reassurance, he was scanning for threats. What kind of life was I walking into? What kind of world was I bringing my child into? But as another crash of thunder shook the building and the lights flickered again, I realized I was already living in a dangerous world. At least with Preston, I wouldn't be facing it alone. When I zipped up my suitcase 15 minutes later, I felt like I was closing the door on more than just my belongings. I was sealing away the last remnants of the woman who had believed she could survive on her own. Now I would learn whether the woman who emerged from Preston's world would be stronger than the one she replaced, or whether she would lose herself entirely in the process. Though the ride to Preston's estate passed in a blur of city lights and silence, the weight of my decision settling over me like a heavy blanket. His car was everything I expected. Leather seats that probably cost more than my yearly salary. Tinted windows that kept the world at bay. And a driver who kept his eyes firmly on the road and his mouth shut. Preston sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. But he didn't speak. He simply watched me with those penetrating gray eyes, as if he could read every doubt and fear written across my face. When we finally pulled through wrought iron gates that seemed to stretch endlessly upward, I caught my first glimpse of what Preston called home. The mansion rose from manicured grounds like something from a fairy tale, all stone and glass and impossible elegance. Warm light spilled from dozens of windows, and I could see staff moving efficiently through rooms that looked larger than my entire apartment building. "It's beautiful," I whispered, though the word felt inadequate. "It's home," Preston said simply. But there was something in his voice, a note of pride mixed with loneliness that made me look at him more carefully. The car stopped beneath a covered entrance where a woman in her 50s waited. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in an efficient bun, and when she smiled, it reached all the way to her eyes in a way that immediately put me at ease. "This is Mrs. Chen," Preston said as he helped me from the car. "She manages the household and has been with my family for 20 years. If you need anything at all, she's the person to ask." Mrs. Chen stepped forward with a warmth that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. "Miss Walker, welcome. I've prepared the blue suite for you in the East Wing. I hope you'll find it comfortable." The East Wing. Even that sounded impossibly grand. I followed them into a foyer that took my breath away. Marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in museums, and a staircase that curved upward like something from a movie. But despite the opulence, there was something lived in about the space. Something that spoke of family rather than just wealth. "Where is Piper?" I asked as we climbed the stairs. Preston's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sleeping. The medication makes her tired and she needs her rest. You'll meet her tomorrow when she's feeling stronger." We walked down a hallway lined with portraits, generations of Castellanos staring down with varying degrees of severity and intelligence. Preston's resemblance to several of them was unmistakable. The same strong jaw and intense eyes passed down through bloodlines that probably stretched back centuries. The blue suite was larger than my entire apartment, with windows that looked out over gardens I could barely make out in the darkness. The furniture was antique but comfortable, and someone had already placed fresh flowers on the dresser. It was beautiful, luxurious, and completely overwhelming. "There's a nursery connected to the bedroom," Mrs. Chen said gently, opening a door I hadn't noticed. Mr. Castellano had it prepared as soon as he learned about the baby. I stepped into the adjoining room and felt my breath catch. It was perfect. Soft yellows and whites. A crib that looked like it belonged in a palace. Toys that were clearly expensive, but also clearly chosen with love. Mobile of stars and moons hung above the crib, and shelves lined the walls with books and stuffed animals. "How long have you known?" I asked Preston, my voice barely above a whisper. "About the baby?" 3 weeks. He moved to stand beside me, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "About where you were living?" "Much longer." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "How much longer?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "I found you 6 months after you left, Penelope. I've been watching over you ever since." The room seemed to tilt around me. 6 months. He'd known where I was for over a year, had watched me struggle, watched me work 3 jobs and barely scrape by, and had done nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. "You watched me suffer," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "You watched me work myself into exhaustion, watched me worry about rent and food and medical bills, and you did nothing." "I protected you," Preston said quietly. "There's a difference." "Protected me from what? From having a decent life? From being able to afford groceries?" Preston turned to face me fully, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "From myself, Penelope. From the part of me that wanted to drag you back the moment I found you, regardless of what you wanted." His honesty was like a slap that somehow also felt like a caress. I could see the truth in his eyes, the war he'd been fighting between his desire to possess and his recognition of my autonomy. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it in a way that made my anger complicated. "So why now?" I asked. "Why finally make your move?" "Because Piper is dying," he said simply. "And because you're carrying my child. 2 things that change the equation completely." I sank into a nearby chair, the weight of everything finally catching up with me. The baby, Piper, Preston's world, the danger he'd hinted at. It was all too much to process at once. "Tell me about the night I left," I said suddenly. "Tell me the truth about what happened." Preston's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You walked in on a business meeting. You saw things you weren't supposed to see, heard conversations that put you in danger just by witnessing them." The memories came flooding back. The fear in the man's eyes as Preston's associates had surrounded him. The envelope of money that had changed hands. The quiet menace in Preston's voice as he delivered what sounded like a death sentence. I'd thought I was in love with a successful businessman. Instead, I'd discovered I was sleeping with someone whose power came from places I didn't want to understand. I ran because I was scared, I admitted. Not just of what I saw, but of how much I still wanted to stay despite it. Something shifted in Preston's expression, a crack in his careful control. "You should have stayed," I would have explained everything, would have helped you understand. Understand what? That the man I loved was dangerous. That staying with you meant becoming part of a world where people disappeared for asking the wrong questions. I shook my head. I couldn't do it, Preston. I couldn't be that person. And yet, here you are, he said softly. The words hung between us, loaded with implication. Here I was, in his house, carrying his child, about to become part of his family in ways I'd never allowed myself to consider before. The woman who had run in terror 18 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes survival meant making choices that didn't align with your ideals. This is different, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. Is it? Preston moved closer, and I could smell that familiar cologne that still made my pulse race despite everything. Or are you finally ready to admit that you belong here? The question cut to the heart of something I'd been avoiding for 18 months. The truth was that I'd never felt as alive, as seen, as complete as I had during those few months with Preston. Leaving him had been the right choice for the woman I'd been then, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I need to see the contract, I said instead of answering his question directly. Preston smiled slightly, as if he'd expected this deflection. From his jacket, he produced a folder that was thicker than I'd anticipated. Everything we discussed, plus additional provisions for your security and comfort. Read it carefully, Penelope. I don't want there to be any surprises. I took the folder with trembling hands, knowing that opening it would be another step deeper into Preston's world. The first page outlined my responsibilities regarding Piper's care: companionship, assistance with daily activities, emotional support. It was more specific than I'd expected, detailing everything from meal preferences to medication schedules. The second section covered my living arrangements, and my eyes widened at the monthly allowance listed. It was more money than I'd made in the past year combined, more than enough to ensure I'd never worry about basic necessities again. But it was the third section that made my hands shake. The section outlining the expectations regarding our relationship, the baby, and my place in the Castellano family. The language was carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. I wouldn't just be caring for Piper. I would be integrating into Preston's life in ways that went far beyond a simple caregiving arrangement. There's an exit clause, Preston said quietly, watching my face as I read. Page 12. You can leave at any time with 60 days' notice. Your allowance continues for 6 months after departure to ensure you and the baby are properly settled. I flipped to the page he'd mentioned, reading the carefully worded language that promised my freedom, even as it made clear the complications that would arise from exercising it. Preston wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a life. A complicated, dangerous, utterly seductive life that would be almost impossible to walk away from once I'd tasted it fully. And if something happens to Piper? I asked, the question catching in my throat. Preston's expression grew pained. Then we renegotiate based on our new circumstances. But Penelope, I need you to understand. This isn't just about Piper. It was never just about Piper. His honesty was devastating in its simplicity. He was using his sister's illness as a way to get me back, to bind me to him in ways that would be almost impossible to break. It should have made me angry, should have sent me running for the door. Instead, it made me feel wanted in a way I'd never experienced before. I need time to think, I said, closing the folder. Of course. Preston moved toward the door, then paused. Penelope, whatever you decide, know that you're safe here. Both of you. That's not conditional on your answer. After he left, I sat in the beautiful room surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, holding a contract that would change my life forever. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crystalline silence that felt like the world holding its breath. Tomorrow I would meet Piper. Tomorrow I would see if Preston's sister needed the kind of care only I could provide, or if this was all an elaborate manipulation designed to trap me in golden chains. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt safe, protected, wanted. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite, painting everything in shades of gold that made the previous night feel like a fever dream. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through the implications of Preston's contract and the weight of the decision ahead of me. But it was the gentle knock at my door at 8 a.m. that truly brought reality crashing back. "Miss Walker?" Mrs. Chen's voice was soft, respectful. "Miss Piper is awake and asking to meet you, if you're feeling up to it." My heart hammered against my ribs as I dressed carefully in one of the few decent outfits I'd packed, a simple blue dress that accommodated my growing bump without calling attention to it. This meeting would determine everything. If Piper and I didn't connect, if I couldn't provide what she needed, then Preston's entire proposition would crumble. Mrs. Chen led me through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past rooms that spoke of generations of wealth and power. But as we approached Piper's wing of the house, the atmosphere changed. The marble gave way to warmer hardwood, the imposing portraits replaced by photographs of a young girl at various ages, riding horses, laughing with friends, accepting academic awards. "She's having a good morning," Mrs. Chen said quietly as we paused outside a door, painted a cheerful yellow. "The new medication seems to be helping with the pain." The pain. The words hit me like a physical blow, reminding me that behind Preston's political maneuvering was a 16-year-old girl who was dying. Whatever complex games Preston and I were playing, Piper was the innocent at the center of it all. The room I entered was unlike anything I'd expected. Instead of the sterile medical environment I'd imagined, it was clearly the bedroom of a teenager who refused to let illness define her. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with everything from classic literature to young adult romance novels. The easel stood by the window, holding a half-finished painting of the gardens outside. And curled up in a window seat with a book in her lap was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. Piper Castellano had Preston's dark hair and gray eyes, but where his features spoke of power and control, hers radiated warmth and intelligence. She was thin, too thin, and there was a fragility to her that made my maternal instincts surge protectively. But when she looked up at me, her smile was radiant. "You must be Penelope," she said, setting down her book. "Preston told me you might come stay with us for a while." Her voice was slightly breathless, as if speaking required more effort than it should. But there was genuine happiness in her tone that caught me off guard. I'd expected resentment, suspicion, or at least wariness. Instead, Piper looked at me like I was an answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to voice. "I'm still considering it," I said honestly, moving closer to her window seat. "I wanted to meet you first, see if we'd be compatible." Piper laughed, a sound like silver bells that made something tight in my chest loosen. "Compatible? You mean you want to see if I'm too much of a brat to tolerate?" Her directness reminded me painfully of Preston, but without the edge of danger that made every conversation with him feel like negotiating with a beautiful predator. With Piper, I felt like I could breathe. "Something like that," I admitted, settling into a chair across from her. "What do you think about having someone around to help you?" Piper's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment, I saw beyond the bright smile to the exhaustion and fear she worked so hard to hide. "I think it would be nice to have someone who doesn't look at me like I'm already dead." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. This brave, brilliant girl was surrounded by people who treated her like a tragedy waiting to happen, when what she needed was someone who could see the life still burning bright inside her. "Tell me about your painting," I said, nodding toward the easel. Piper's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm trying to capture how the gardens look in morning light, but I can't quite get the shadows right. The way they fall across the fountain changes every few minutes, and by the time I mix the right color, the light has moved. I moved to examine her work, and my breath caught. The painting was extraordinary, not just technically proficient, but infused with a kind of emotional depth that spoke of an artist with real talent. The gardens came alive under her brush, every flower and shadow rendered with loving attention to detail. "This is incredible, Piper. How long have you been painting?" "Since I got sick," she said quietly. Preston had the art supplies brought in when I couldn't go to school anymore. He thought it might help me feel less trapped. The image of Preston carefully selecting art supplies for his dying sister hit me unexpectedly. It was hard to reconcile the dangerous man I'd fled from with the brother who understood that a 16-year-old girl needed beauty and purpose even in the face of death. "Do you mind if I ask about your condition?" I said carefully. Piper shrugged with the practiced casualness of someone who'd had this conversation many times. "Aplastic anemia with complications. Basically, my bone marrow decided to stop doing its job, and the treatments that might help could also kill me faster." She paused, studying my face. "Does that scare you?" "No," I said honestly, "but it makes me angry." Piper blinked in surprise. "Angry? That someone as talented and bright as you has to fight so hard just to exist? That the world might lose your art, your perspective, your light before you've had a chance to really share it?" I felt tears prick my eyes. It's not fair. For a moment, Piper said nothing. Then she smiled. But this time it was different. Softer. More real. Most people try to tell me everything happens for a reason, or that I'm brave, or that I should stay positive. No one's ever said they're angry on my behalf. Well, I am. Furious, actually. Piper laughed again, and this time I heard something that hadn't been there before. Hope. "I think I like you, Penelope Walker. The feeling is mutual." We spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Piper showed me her book collection, her journal full of sketches, the garden outside her window where she liked to sit when she felt strong enough. She was brilliant, funny, and desperately lonely despite being surrounded by staff and medical professionals. It was when she was showing me photos on her phone that she paused, looking at me with sudden intensity. "Penelope, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you in love with my brother?" The question hit me like cold water. I opened my mouth to give her a safe, diplomatic answer, but something about her direct gaze made me tell the truth instead. "I was once. I'm not sure what I feel now." Piper nodded as if this made perfect sense. "He's been different since you left. Sadder. More closed off than usual, which is saying something." She hesitated, then continued. "He's not good at explaining his feelings, but he's been talking about you for months. Worrying about you. Worrying about me? He has people check on you regularly, make sure you're safe, that you have what you need. He never interfered, but he was always watching." Piper's expression grew serious. "Preston doesn't care about very many people, Penelope. But when he does care, it's absolute. Complete. Sometimes overwhelming." Her words painted a picture I wasn't sure I was ready to see. Preston spending months torn between his desire to reclaim me and his respect for my choices. It complicated my understanding of his motives in ways that made my chest ache. "He told you about the baby," I said. It wasn't a question. Piper's smile was gentle. "He's terrified he's going to mess it up. Being a father, I mean. Our own father wasn't exactly a role model for healthy relationships." The admission opened a door I hadn't expected. "What was he like? Your father?" Piper's expression darkened slightly. "Powerful, cold. He loved us, I think, but he loved control more. Preston swore he'd never be like him, but sometimes I see Dad's habits creeping in. The need to manage everything, to protect people whether they want protection or not. Her words echoed my own fears about Preston, but coming from Piper, they felt less like condemnation and more like understanding. She knew her brother's flaws better than anyone, and she still loved him fiercely. "Is that why you ran?" she asked softly. "Because you saw Dad in him?" I considered her question carefully. Partly, but mostly because I was scared of how much I wanted to stay despite everything I'd learned about his world. Piper nodded slowly. Fear can make us do stupid things, but so can pride. We were interrupted by Preston's arrival, and I watched Piper's entire demeanor brighten as he entered the room. The love between them was palpable, uncomplicated by the power dynamics that made every interaction between Preston and me feel like a chess match. "How are you feeling today, little star?" he asked, settling onto the arm of her chair with an easy affection that made my heart clench. "Better now that I've met Penelope," Piper said, shooting me a meaningful look. "I like her, Preston. A lot." Preston's gaze found mine across the room, and I saw relief there, mixed with something deeper and more complex. "I'm glad to hear that." "She's going to stay, isn't she?" Piper asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice that made the decision for me. I looked at this brave, brilliant girl who needed someone to see her as more than her illness, at the brother who loved her enough to risk everything to make her happy, and felt the last of my resistance crumble. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm going to stay." The joy that lit up Piper's face was worth every complication that would follow. Preston's expression was more controlled, but I caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes before he looked away. "Welcome to the family, Penelope," Piper said, reaching for my hand. As I squeezed her thin fingers gently, I realized I'd just stepped across a threshold I couldn't uncross. Whatever happened next, whatever prices I'd have to pay for this choice, I was committed now. For better or worse, I belonged to the Castellanos. 3 weeks into my life at the Castellano estate, I'd fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to belonging. My days were structured around Piper's needs: morning art sessions when her energy was highest, afternoon reading when the fatigue set in, evening conversations that ranged from her dreams of art school to her fears about the future she might not have. She was everything Preston had promised: brilliant, brave, and desperately in need of someone who saw her as more than her diagnosis. But it was the evenings that undid me. After Piper retired for the night, Preston would find me in the library or the garden, and we'd talk with a careful politeness that barely concealed the electric tension between us. He was solicitous, attentive, and completely maddening in his restraint. I caught him watching me sometimes with an intensity that made my skin burn, but he never crossed the invisible lines we'd established. Until tonight. I was in the nursery, arranging books on the shelves while my baby performed what felt like gymnastics routines inside me. The room had become my sanctuary, a place where I could dream about the future without the complications that defined every other aspect of my life here. The soft yellow walls and carefully chosen furniture spoke of hope, of new beginnings, of the possibility that something beautiful could grow from the ashes of my old life. The rocking chair arrived today. Preston's voice came from the doorway, making me jump. I turned to find him leaning against the frame, still wearing the expensive suit he'd worn to whatever business meeting had occupied his afternoon. But his tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, and there was something different in his expression, less controlled than usual. "It's beautiful," I said, gesturing to the antique chair positioned near the window. "But you didn't need to." "I wanted to," he interrupted, stepping into the room. "My mother used to rock me to sleep in a chair just like that," I thought. I hoped our child might enjoy the same comfort. Our child. The possessive pronoun sent shivers down my spine. A reminder that despite all the careful boundaries we'd maintained, Preston considered both the baby and me to be his, in ways that went far beyond legal documentation. "Preston, we need to talk about expectations," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you first, something that changes everything." His expression grew serious, and I felt that familiar chill of dread. "We had a situation today. Someone's been asking questions about you." The book I'd been holding slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "What kind of questions?" Preston moved closer, his protective instincts clearly warring with his desire not to frighten me. "A private investigator contacted the clinic where you were receiving prenatal care. He claimed to be working for your family, said they were worried about you." My blood turned to ice. My family had written me off years ago when I'd refused to return home and marry the boy they'd chosen for me. They wouldn't hire anyone to find me, which meant someone else was using their names as cover. "Who's really looking for me?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Preston's jaw tightened. "We're still investigating, but the most likely scenario is that someone from my world thinks you might have information that could be valuable to them. Your sudden disappearance 18 months ago, followed by your equally sudden reappearance in my life, has raised questions." "What kind of information?" I demanded, fear making my voice sharp. "Details about my business operations. Names, locations, financial arrangements." Preston's expression grew pained. "The night you left, you saw and heard things that could be damaging in the wrong hands." The memories came flooding back. The fear in that man's eyes, the envelope of money, the quiet menace in Preston's voice. I'd tried so hard to forget those details, to convince myself they weren't as serious as they'd seemed. But now, they were coming back to haunt me. "I don't know anything useful," I protested. "I barely understood what I was seeing." "You and I know that, but my enemies don't." Preston reached for me, his hands settling on my shoulders with gentle firmness. "Which is why you can't leave here, Penelope. Not now. Not until we neutralize this threat." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying I'm a prisoner." "I'm saying you're under my protection," Preston corrected, but his grip on my shoulders tightened slightly. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I pulled away from him, anger flaring bright and hot in my chest. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're using this threat as an excuse to keep me here regardless of what I want." Something dangerous flickered in Preston's eyes. "And what do you want, Penelope? Really? Because I've watched you these past 3 weeks, and I see how you look at this place, at this life. You're not yearning for your tiny apartment and your 3 jobs. You're terrified of how much you want to stay." His words cut too close to the truth, and I lashed out reflexively. "You don't know what I want." "Don't I?" Preston stepped closer, backing me against the nursery window. "I know you spend hours in here, arranging and rearranging things for our baby. I know you've started reading Italian poetry to Piper because it reminds her of our grandmother. I know you look at me across the dinner table and try to hide how much you want me to touch you." My breath caught as he caged me against the window with his arms, his body radiating heat and barely controlled desire. "Preston, I know because I want the same things," he continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I want to see you swollen with my child, safe in my house, part of my family in every way that matters. I want to watch you bring life into this world and know that both of you belong to me." "Belong to you," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "Like possessions." Preston's expression grew pained. "Like precious things that need protecting. Like the most important parts of my world that I would kill or die to keep safe." Before I could respond, he kissed me. It was nothing like the careful, restrained man I'd been living with for the past 3 weeks. This was the Preston I remembered from 18 months ago. Passionate, demanding, overwhelming in his intensity. His hands tangled in my hair, his mouth claiming mine with a hunger that made my knees weak. I should have pushed him away, should have reminded him of all the reasons this was complicated, dangerous, impossible. Instead, I melted into him, my body remembering what my mind had tried so hard to forget. The taste of him, the feel of his hands on my skin, the way he made me feel both utterly safe and completely out of control. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against mine. "Tell me you don't want this," he whispered. "Tell me you don't feel what I feel, and I'll find another way to keep you safe. I'll maintain the boundaries, keep my distance, treat this like nothing more than a business arrangement." I opened my mouth to lie, to give him the safe answer that would preserve the careful balance we'd maintained. But before I could speak, the baby moved sharply, a strong kick that made me gasp and press my hand to my stomach. Preston's eyes immediately dropped to where my hand rested, and his expression transformed into something almost reverent. "Can I?" I nodded, unable to speak, and watched as he placed his large hand over mine. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Preston's sharp intake of breath made tears spring to my eyes. "My child," he whispered, wonder and possession warring in his voice. My family. Standing there in the nursery he'd created, with his hand covering mine and our baby moving between us, I felt the last of my defenses crumble. This wasn't just about survival anymore, or about providing for my child, or even about helping Piper. This was about the fact that I'd never stopped loving Preston Castellano, despite everything that had driven me away. "I can't promise this will be easy," I said quietly. "I can't promise I won't fight you when you try to control me, or that I won't be terrified of your world." Preston's smile was soft, victorious, and utterly devastating. "I'm not asking for easy, Penelope. I'm asking for real." Before I could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, followed by shouting and the distinctive crack of gunfire. Preston's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the tender lover disappearing behind the mask of a dangerous man who'd been expecting this moment. "Stay here," he commanded, pulling a gun from somewhere inside his jacket with fluid efficiency. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except Mrs. Chen or myself." "Preston, what's happening?" His expression was grim as he moved toward the door. "Someone's decided that asking polite questions wasn't getting them what they needed. They're here for you, Penelope, and they're not planning to ask nicely." More gunfire erupted from somewhere below us, and I could hear Mrs. Chen's voice shouting instructions to the staff. Preston paused at the threshold, his gray eyes holding mine with fierce intensity. "Remember what I told you about my protection being absolute? You're about to see what that really means." He disappeared into the hallway, leaving me alone in the nursery with the sounds of battle echoing through the house. I locked the door with shaking hands, then sank into the rocking chair he'd bought for our child, my hand pressed protectively over my stomach. Outside, I could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as Preston's security team engaged with whoever had breached the estate's defenses. This was his world. Violence and danger, and people who would kill for information I didn't even know I possessed. But as I sat there, listening to the sounds of men fighting to protect me and my unborn child, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wasn't thinking about escaping anymore. I was thinking about Preston out there in the darkness, risking his life to keep me safe. I was thinking about how much I loved him, despite everything. And I was thinking about how I would never forgive myself if something happened to him before I had the chance to tell him. The baby kicked again, strong and insistent, as if reminding me that there was more at stake now than just my own heart. Whatever happened tonight, whatever choices I had to make in the aftermath, I was no longer just responsible for myself. I was part of the Castellano family now, with all the protection and danger that entailed. The war outside raged on, but inside the nursery, surrounded by hopes and dreams for the future, I finally admitted what I'd been fighting since the moment Preston had appeared at my apartment door. I was exactly where I belonged. And the gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a silence that felt more ominous than the chaos that had preceded it. I remained locked in the nursery, my heart hammering against my ribs as I strained to hear any sound that might tell me whether Preston was alive or dead. The baby seemed to sense my distress, moving restlessly as if trying to comfort me from within. When footsteps finally approached the nursery door, I held my breath until I heard Preston's voice, rough with exhaustion, but unmistakably alive. "Penelope, it's me. Open the door." My hands shook as I turned the lock, and the moment the door opened, Preston pulled me into his arms with desperate intensity. I could smell gunpowder and sweat on his clothes, could feel the tension radiating from his body. But he was whole and safe and holding me like I was the most precious thing in his world. "Are you hurt?" I asked, pulling back to examine his face for injuries. "No, but they got away with something more valuable than they probably realized." His expression was grim as he guided me toward the bed, settling me carefully against the pillows. "They weren't here for information, Penelope. They were here for you." The words sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" Preston ran a hand through his disheveled hair, and I could see the weight of decisions pressing down on him. "The men who attacked tonight weren't looking to interrogate you about what you might have seen 18 months ago. They were planning to take you, use you as leverage against me." "Leverage for what?" "Everything." His voice carried a finality that made my blood run cold. "My territory, my operations, my loyalty to certain business partners. They know that you and our child are my weakness now, and they're willing to exploit that." I felt the walls of my new world closing in around me, beautiful and protective and utterly inescapable. "So what happens now?" Preston's expression grew tender as he reached for my hand, his thumb tracing over my knuckles with gentle reverence. "Now you have a choice to make, Penelope. A real choice. Perhaps the last free choice you'll have for a very long time." My throat tightened. "Which is?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross. Not because I didn't want to. God help me. I wanted it more than I'd ever wanted anything. But because I understood what marriage to Preston Castellano would mean. "Preston, Let me finish," he said gently. "Marry me, and you become untouchable. My wife, the mother of my children, protected by every alliance I've built and every enemy I've eliminated. But more than that, you become my partner in every sense of the word, my equal, my other half, the woman who stands beside me as we build something better than what came before." Tears sprang to my eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. "And if I say no?" Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then I keep you safe by any means necessary, which will be considerably less pleasant for both of us, because I won't lose you again, Penelope. I won't lose our child. I'd rather be the monster who cages you than the fool who lets you slip away and get killed for it." His honesty was brutal and beautiful and completely devastating. He was offering me the illusion of choice while making it clear that the outcome would be the same regardless of my answer. The only difference was whether I would be his willing partner or his beautiful prisoner. "You're asking me to choose between freedom and safety," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to choose between the fantasy of freedom and the reality of protection." Preston's hand moved to rest on my stomach, over our child. "This isn't just about you anymore, and it hasn't been since the moment you decided to carry my baby." Before I could respond, a soft knock interrupted us. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her usually composed expression showing cracks of concern. "Mr. Castellano, Miss Piper is asking for both of you. She heard the commotion and she's upset." The reminder of Piper's fragile condition sent guilt crashing over me. In all the chaos and confusion, I'd forgotten about the 16-year-old girl who was fighting for her life and didn't need the additional stress of worrying about whether her newfound companion was about to disappear. We found Piper in her wheelchair by her bedroom window, staring out at the estate grounds where Preston's security team was still cleaning up evidence of the attack. She looked smaller than usual, more fragile, and when she turned to face us, I could see fear in her gray eyes that had nothing to do with her illness. "They came for Penelope, didn't they?" she asked without preamble. Preston moved to kneel beside her wheelchair, his expression gentle despite the steel underlying his voice. "They did, but they failed, and they won't get another chance." Piper's gaze moved to me, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten. Desperate hope mixed with the terrible understanding that came from living with death as a constant companion. "You're not going to leave, are you?" she asked me directly. "Because if you leave now, you'll never be safe, and Preston will destroy himself trying to protect you from a distance." The wisdom in her young voice was heartbreaking. Here was a girl who understood the complexities of love and loyalty and sacrifice better than most adults, simply because she'd been forced to confront mortality at an age when most people still believed in fairy tale endings. "I don't want to leave," I admitted, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "But I'm scared of what staying means." Piper smiled, and for a moment, she looked like any normal teenager instead of a dying girl carrying burdens too heavy for her shoulders. "Being scared just means it matters. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't be afraid." Her words hit me like a revelation. I'd been so focused on the dangers and complications of loving Preston that I'd forgotten the most important truth. The fear itself was proof that what we had was worth fighting for. "Piper's right," Preston said softly, rising to his feet. "Fear means it matters, but it doesn't have to mean it's impossible." I looked at them both, Preston with his dangerous beauty and absolute devotion, Piper with her fierce intelligence and borrowed time, and felt something shift inside me. These people had become my family in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or obligations. They'd become the people I would fight for, die for, live for. "Yes," I said quietly. Preston's entire body went still. "Yes to what?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it." I moved to stand in front of him, placing my hands on his chest where I could feel his heart hammering beneath my palms. "But I have conditions." A slow smile spread across Preston's face, transforming him from dangerous predator to the man I'd fallen in love with all those months ago. "Name them." "I want to be your partner, not your possession. I want to know about your business, understand your world, have a voice in decisions that affect our family." I paused, gathering courage for the next part. "And I want to help you build something better, something our children can be proud of instead of afraid of." Preston's expression grew serious, almost reverent. "You're asking me to change everything. I'm asking you to grow into the man I know you can be. The man who buys art supplies for his dying sister and creates nurseries for babies that aren't even born yet. The man who's capable of love that transforms instead of consuming." For a long moment, Preston said nothing. Then he dropped to one knee right there in Piper's bedroom, pulling a ring box from his jacket with the fluid grace of a man who'd been planning this moment for longer than I'd realized. "Penelope Walker," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me and help me become the man worthy of you and our children?" The ring was exquisite, a classic solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire. But it was the vulnerability in Preston's eyes that took my breath away. This powerful, dangerous man was kneeling before me, offering not just his protection, but his transformation. "Yes," I whispered, letting him slide the ring onto my finger. "Yes to all of it." Piper's delighted laughter filled the room as Preston rose to kiss me, and for a moment we were just a family celebrating an engagement instead of people whose lives were defined by danger and death and the constant threat of violence. But reality intruded when Preston's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression grew serious as he read it, and I felt that familiar chill of dread. "What is it?" I asked, confirmation of who was behind tonight's attack and why they targeted you specifically. Preston's jaw tightened. "It seems your pregnancy has made you valuable to more people than just me." The words sent fear crawling up my spine. Valuable how? As leverage against me, obviously, but also. Preston hesitated, then continued with obvious reluctance. "There are people in my world who believe that children born into families like mine inherit more than just money and power. They think your baby might someday be useful to them in ways that have nothing to do with family loyalty. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My child, our child, would never be truly safe as long as there were people who saw babies as future investments in their criminal enterprises. Then we make sure they're wrong," I said fiercely, my hand moving protectively to my stomach. "We make sure our child grows up in a world where love matters more than power, where family means protection instead of exploitation." Preston's smile was proud and possessive and absolutely devastating. "We will. I promise you that, Penelope. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll build something better for our children." As if summoned by our words, the baby kicked strongly, a reminder that time was moving forward whether we were ready or not. In a few months, I would bring new life into Preston's dangerous world, but I would also bring the possibility of redemption. "When?" Piper asked suddenly. We both turned to look at her, confused. "The wedding," she clarified with a grin that reminded me she was still a teenager despite everything she'd endured. "When are you getting married?" "Because I want to be well enough to be your maid of honor, which means we need to plan around my good days." The casual way she acknowledged her illness while still claiming her place in our future made my throat tight with emotion. This brave girl had taught me something crucial about living with uncertainty. You didn't waste time preparing for the worst. You grabbed hold of joy whenever it appeared and held on tight. "Soon," Preston said, his arm tightening around me. "Very soon." As we stood there in Piper's sunlit room, planning a wedding that would bind me to Preston's world forever, I realized I'd finally found what I'd been searching for my entire life. A family worth fighting for, a love worth the risks, and a future worth building despite all the forces aligned against it. The road ahead would be dangerous, complicated, and utterly unpredictable. But I would walk it with Preston Castellano by my side, our children in our arms, and the unshakable knowledge that some things were worth any price. Love, it turned out, was the strongest weapon of all.